And this is the next in a series of talks or explanations regarding different features when you're using an ASL interpreter in VRI. The last one was how to use an interpreter or how to work with an interpreter during a VRI assignment. One thing that I neglected to mention during the previous talk was some things that you should avoid doing, or at least one thing that it comes to mind is that oftentimes when I'm interpreting for deaf patients, especially, and it happens in other situations as well, but the medical provider or the hearing person will be using an iPad to connect to me, the interpreter. However, they will ask the deaf patient to hold the iPad during the appointment. This never works. A deaf person needs both hands to sign. Ideally, they can definitely sign with one hand, but it's much clearer for clarity and for avoiding any mistakes or accidents. It's always best that the deaf patient sign with both hands. So that makes it pretty much impossible to hold a device like an iPad or something like that while you're signing. So please never ask the patient or the deaf person to hold an iPad or hold a device while they're signing. Get a prop, get a tripod, get something like that to prop up the iPad. I've actually had people who will, well, the doctors will call an assistant to hold the iPad device while the deaf person is signing. That works, but it also doesn't provide a stable situation because there's usually some shaking going on with the iPad, or the assistant will unknowingly move the iPad a bit, and then the deaf person will be out of focus on the screen to me, so I need to be able to see them, like I stated previously, from the waistline up. So please never ask a patient to hold the iPad. That's like a no-no. But anyway, I was going to talk about today was some VRI basics and benefits of using VRI. Again, my name is Dr. Daniel Swartz. I've been interpreting for better than 38 years, going on 39. So I've got a wealth of experience, and I just wanted to talk to you about how to use VRI and some of the benefits of using VRI. One of the key benefits it is VRI allows interpreters to provide services via video conferencing platforms rather than an interpreter having to go in person to the site. This solves a number of problems. Although I will point out a negative that, at least negative from the deaf person's point of view, is deaf people are not really hip or don't really like the idea of using VRI or video remote interpreting. They always want to see the interpreter on site in person. Yes, that's the optimal situation, optimal environment. However, with VRI and using video conferencing technology, platforms like Zoom, WebEx, MS Teams, Google Meet, things like that, it saves the need of an interpreter driving from point A to point B, and it makes interpreters more readily available. If the time that a person is booked, like myself, booked for an interpreting assignment, can be minimized, I will do much less traveling around and do much more actual interpreting. So it's cost effective in that regard. You're not paying me to drive from point A to point B and then back to point A again. Rather, you're just paying for my time of interpreting. So that definitely saves on time, saves on resources, because there still is a national shortage of ASL interpreters. And to maximize the limited sources that we have, limited, it's a matter of supply and demand. So with a limited supply, to make the best use of a limited supply is to optimize the use of that supply. So to just optimize the number of minutes that a person can actually be interpreting rather than driving all over the place, that's definitely a benefit. And it's definitely more eco-friendly, less of a carbon footprint. I'm not driving anywhere. I'm not consuming fossil fuel when I do VRI. So the eco-friendly aspect of it is really a big sell, and it's really a huge benefit too. And oftentimes VRI appointments can be arranged very quickly in many cases. I've interpreted in many VRI hospital emergency rooms, and while I do hear and I do understand that deaf people will complain and say, no, I don't want a VRI interpreter, I want a in-person interpreter. When you're talking about an emergency situation, time is of the essence. And the time that it would take from an interpreter, for an interpreter, for me, for example, to drive from my home to a hospital could range 15 minutes up to an hour, up to 2 hours, depending on traffic, etc. That is time that you don't really have the luxury of in a hospital emergency room environment. So it's much better to get me on the phone, get me on on the webcam, etc., and hooked up and start interpreting. Like I said, in an emergency, in an injury type setting, things like that, time is of the essence. So I really I used to, and I'm going to fess up with you because I used to be really, I was pretty much opposed to using VRI, uh, virtual remote interpreting, because I definitely heard the deaf people, and I have deafness in my family, my son's deaf, so I really heard that and I was speaking to that. But over time, with the improvement in technology, improvement of the speed, the frame rate that interpreting can take place, be it 30 up to 60 frames per second, is much improved than it used to be like 5, 10, 15, 20 years ago. It's improving all the time. So when you have high-speed internet access, for me, for my office environment, for my video remote interpreting work, I have fiber optics, and my upload speed is always above 700 megabyte per second, and my download speed averages around 200, give or take, megabytes per second. So that's off the charts, and you will never experience at least any problems on my end when it comes to VRI interpreting. But then bear in mind, with VRI interpreting, when all parties are connected, it's going to defer to the lowest common denominator. Now, if I've got 700, 200 speed on my internet connection, but on your end at the hospital or a doctor's office or government office, wherever it may be, if you're dealing with like firewalls and various things like that, or hotspots or Wi-Fi, and you're not hardwired, which I am, your speed may be much less than that, so you could get some pixelation, freezing, loss of audio, things like that, glitches. So it's, like I said, it always defers to the lowest common denominator. If the lowest common denominator is the end user speed, which is compromised, then it's going to suffer. So we all have to have optimal connections, optimal equipment, etc. Okay, so that kind of wraps it up for what I wanted to say today about using VRI. Next time I'll see you, I'm going to talk about challenges in using VRI and how to overcome them. So I want to thank you very much for your time.